for increase in revenues received from the state. The state certified the new population figures from the census during the latter part of the fiscal year 2014, so we're receiving more dollars per capita. Some of those dollars will come from state income taxes, local taxes, and motor fuel taxes. Moving on in the audit to page 13 through 23, these are all basic financial statements. The statements show the statement of net position for the funds, statement of activities, which are expenses and charges for services for the funds. There are also statements of revenues and expenditures and a statement of cash flow. I'm sure you've all looked through that and digested it all very well. To some more notes of the financial statements, the notes start on page 24 and they continue through page 39. Throughout the notes is background information of definitions. Some notes to reiterate are as follows. Note payable bank, the loan matures January 1st, 2016, and as Trustee Daly stated, this December we're going to be making a large payment to bring that down, so our next budget year will have less to do the last one-time balloon payment, which is stated in there of $343,000, so that would be roughly cut in half. Another note would be the Illinois IEPA loan. The first loan payment was due back on May 2013 and continues until May 1st, 2032. This is the long-term loan that we have for all the infrastructure for the water mains with Route 120. Good news, the RULOC Economic Development Agreement entered in 2003. Our village remits back to the retail establishment 50% of the sales tax received collected by the establishment. The agreement did not terminate within this fiscal year, but in 2015 we made our final payment to that. So we'll start using more sales tax dollars for our purposes. That's a good thing. The intergovernment agreement entered in the school district 46 has a credit balance 47,000, almost 48,000. The agreement was to abate and waive the fees for charges associated with providing water service to the elementary school for review. That total amount that the board agreed to was 170,000. So we're down to roughly 48,000 for credit. The final pages of the audit show schedules of revenues and expenditures for the general fund, comparing what was budgeted and what was received or spent. On page 44, you'll find the non-major governmental funds, which show special revenue funds of MFT and SSA, and their total fund balances. You'll also see the two new capital projects funds created during this past fiscal year. The Capital Projects Reserve Fund has a total balance of $190,000 set aside for general capital projects. The Water and Sewer Capital Reserve Fund has a total balance of $101,400 set aside for the capital improvements repairs for the water and sewer system. This was our first stage of getting those two funds established in this fiscal year. We're currently budgeting more funds to go into those. And again, we'll look at it, revisit with this new budget upcoming to put a substantial more amounts into them and start looking into our longevity of the lifespan of all our infrastructure in that. The next schedules are the enterprise fund. It's broken down into the water, sewer, and sanitation funds. Another way to show in the financial statements. It's for the current fiscal year. It includes $142,992 in depreciation. There is a loss or change in the net position of $565,000. This is mainly due to the transferring out of all the street equipment and the assets that were in the public works enterprise fund last years. We're transferring those into the general fund. That's why you see that change in loss. The very last two pages show the history of the last 10 tax levy years, the tax rates and what was extended. Trustee Daly touched on this during his report, the decrease in the tax rates, the funds that were extended to the village over the period of 2008 to 2013, but it does go back further, so you can do some comparison. It goes down to 2004. That's basically about it. I just wanted to touch on some financial highlights. The village as a whole, we're doing very well. We're moving forward with some of our capital planning and that instead of just relying on every year budgeting for this capital project. We're looking out to forecast more questions on the audit?
A general comment before we move to the motion. About 4 years ago, we had about $3 million spendable cash in the bank, what I refer to as our savings account. A large amount of money. We set a goal to gradually spend that money down so that our request for tax dollars didn't decline dramatically. At the end of this past fiscal year, so in April, we were down to about $2.7 million. At the end of this fiscal year, we will be down to about 1.88, 1.9
Estimation.
at the end, at this time, a year from now. And then we'll probably try to maintain that level. It'll give us 7 or 8, 9 months worth of operating funds, which we think is an adequate, a good number to have in the bank. So we've been spending this money down, not raising taxes as much as some communities have. And we've been doing well. Revenue has fallen, as I said, by 40%, yet we've been able to move forward with the village to a lot of projects that needed to be done. And it's still our plan to keep doing those projects, to keep the village fiscally and physically sound.
And I want to add to that, Jerry, I want to say my hat's off to you, the Finance Committee, the entire board, and our treasurer, Kelly, our staff. I think we should all pat ourselves on the back. We've done a great job, particularly in these times. We've been very conservative in a lot of our measures, and yet have continued not only to do improvements, but also add some enhancements in the village. So I think we've managed well. Let's just continue with this upcoming budget. We're going to have some big decisions to make, so really think hard on those.
So I make the motion?
Can we get a second? Okay. Any discussion? Roll call.
Trustees Darrenowski.
Aye.
Kreis.
Aye.
Duberstein. Aye. Daly.
Aye.
And Walkington.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Next up is a motion to approve the annual treasurer's report, fiscal year ending April 30th, 2014.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion? Roll call.
Trustees Darrenowski.
Aye.
Kreis.
Aye.
Duberstein. Aye. Daly.
Aye.
And Walkington.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Okay, we have 2 items remaining under business. These are discussion items at this point. First up, we have our village planner, Al Maiden, here. We had started this discussion previously and gave him some feedback. We have updated maps regarding the Hainesville medical cannabis zoning review. Does everybody have a new colored map? Okay, open it up and Al will give you the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. You should have 3 pieces of information that the village clerk handed out. One is the map that the mayor referenced. We added the setbacks that you had discussed as the board previously with us in regard to setbacks from parks and setbacks from village-owned property, noting that you do have young adults that work as employees for you in the summer. And considering the state has setbacks from things like schools and daycare centers, it was felt that was appropriate as well. When you analyze all this area, the only area remaining that is not zoned residential, where you may locate a medical cannabis type facility, is to the west of the village, southwest of the railroad tracks, and north of Route 120. That area is zoned ORD. I've given you a copy of an updated zoning map. This is not official. Your current zoning map does have some inconsistencies about property that is or is not within railroad right-of-way. We'll have to work with your village attorney. Most communities, you do an annual update, and we'll have to get this exchanged from a draft to an official zoning map for the community. But basically, as you see on that area, the area that, the first map, the area that is zoned ORD is basically the area where such a facility possibly could be located. The last item that we have is a draft, and it's clearly marked for discussion purposes only. I did try to use the format of your existing zoning ordinance, went into the various chapters, went into the various sections. We added provisions for definitions of the medical cannabis cultivation centers, the dispensing organizations, and we took these from the state statute. We then went into the one district that we're indicating maybe a location for this type of use, and provided for it as only as a special use. And then we also added additional requirements that are in your ordinance for special uses. The village attorney and I only briefly had an opportunity to review some of this. We have worked together in other communities that have adopted these types of ordinances, so I think with the state regulations, we can get it in a proper format for a public hearing. I won't go through all of the provisions tonight. What you will need to do is set a public hearing date if you're going to do a text amendment for your ordinance. And I guess you can look at it and tell us, tell the attorney when you think you may be ready for going to a public hearing. Are there any questions?
So just to be clear, it would go under ORD, but it would be a special use. So anyone wanting to come forth would have to go through the public hearing process, correct?
Correct.
If I may, for the benefit of those in the audience who may not have an understanding of why we're even discussing this matter, when the state adopted the statute authorizing medical cannabis, they also, in that statute, included the authority for municipalities to regulate zoning for dispensaries, which is what we're talking about tonight, and for also for cultivation centers. The reason we're not talking about cultivation centers is because based on the setback requirements in the statute, there's nowhere in Hainesville where a cultivation center could be built. And in fact, as far as we can tell, there's only one site in Lake County, and that's in Zion along Lake Michigan. And so it's not an issue for this board really to address. But in terms of the dispensaries, the statute authorizes municipalities to regulate zoning for dispensaries, but it does not authorize municipalities to prohibit a dispensary in the community, to just establish an ordinance that says you can't build a medical cannabis dispensary in our community. So that's the reason for the conversation at this point. The state regulations have come out over the last couple months. You're probably seeing lots of communities addressing this issue at this point, and that's the reason we're talking about it here. And just to give you an idea of, I'm not sure what the likelihood is that someone might want to build one in Hainesville, but at this point, the statute only authorizes 3 dispensaries within Lake County. So within the entire county, there can be up to 3 medical cannabis dispensary facilities. Whether anybody will come to Hainesville with that request or not is to be seen. But it's prudent for the board to be prepared, if that does occur, to be able to address it and at least to respond in terms of what the zoning regulations are in this community. So that's just sort of why we're talking about this tonight.
Thank you, Jim. Are there any questions for Al or for Jim Rock on this issue?
So Jim, you've got to review this proposed, and then we'll get back to us.
We do want to, though, have the public hearing November, December. December. Oh, Gary, I'm going to miss you. zoning map, I think that we can take the opportunity, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, that we can take care of several things with the zoning map, with the railroad right-of-way inconsistencies, updating the zoning map at that same hearing, and any other.
Right, we can do, as long as we advertise it in a public hearing notice, we
Right.
can do more than one.
Yeah, and so I mentioned that to the board, so if there's any concerns you have with present zoning, or just a question you have, now is the opportunity that at that zoning hearing, we can bring up such items. There's,
Want to point out, this does not change any zoning of any property in the community now. If you decide you want to change, then we would have to notify that property owner before.
but the corrections you want to make doesn't change the zoning, it's really what are we doing? We're just making the map more.
More readable and more to a scale that, than the previous map. And like I said, the railroad property was not shown as being in the village. A portion of it was, but not all of it. And technically, the way your ordinance works, like for streets and railroads, it goes to the center line of that facility. So nothing changed, it's just by adding the railroad property as being in the village, it's still the same zoning it was before.
Okay.
Would that update affect the area available for a facility in that 4D area space?
No.
Okay, well, if there's no further questions or discussion, we'll let Jim and Al continue to work out the review and,
Can I just mention this? I just printed this size for handout tonight. They are available in this size, and I can do poster size. So when we get farther along and you decide you want to, do adopt the maps, we'll get you whatever size maps you want.
okay, good to know. The clerk will make a note of that. All right, thank you, Al. Okay, next item up is heritage tree ordinance discussion. I attended a meeting recently, and it was actually about affordable housing and homes for a changing region. But as a side note, we talked about heritage trees and tree preservation ordinances which some municipalities have. And kind of my antenna went up because we do have some beautiful, very mature oaks in our village that aren't necessarily protected. Certainly the ones in the Cranberry Lake Conservancy are protected, but we have some beautiful oak trees, particularly on the south side of 120, I think is the main area where the groves are. But my intent is to try to preserve those trees, but not make something so restrictive to all private property owners. So I wanted to discuss, I gave you a sample of a potential ordinance which is way above and beyond anything I think we're trying to do in our little town. But the one thing we would need to decide if we're going to move forward with this type of ordinance is what we would want the diameter of the tree. DBH, which is a new term that I couldn't figure out what it stood for, and it's diameter at breast height. And so, my question was, whose breast are we using? Because you could get a lot of variance in height on that. And I also looked in the catalog to see if they sell DBH rulers, but I haven't found anything yet. But I want some feedback. We'll go down the line from the board of what your feelings are on this. How do you feel about this type of ordinance, number one? And number two, if you're for it, what do you think is the type of diameter we should be looking to preserve? 10 inches in diameter and above, 8 inches in diameter and above. So I'll start at the end with Gary Walkington. Put Gary on the spot.
10 inches isn't very big, so let's start with about 2.5 feet or something like that. That
2.5 feet.
No.
diameter.
No. that's,
I'm talking about just the diameter across the.
the diameter across the,
Right.
10 inches is not that big.
No, it isn't.
My hand spread is 9.
Yeah, but this is about it, right?
yeah.
So you want to trade to save trees
That are 11 inches.
that are,
Well, you don't have to go after all species, you could just list certain species if you notice, whether it's oaks, we could stick to oak.
The draft is, or the other villages ordinances have at least 10 different ones that they protect, and some that they eliminate. I've got no qualms with the concept. Size, 18 inches. It's certainly a mature tree.
Okay. Georgianne?
I definitely think we need something because one of my neighbors.
Mike.
One of my neighbors cut down a beautiful, fully mature, probably 100-year-old tree in his
Was it an
backyard.
oak? Was it an
An
oak?
oak,
It was an
just because, and he's got it all stacked up for firewood. So I definitely think we need to do something. We could, if there's a question as to what diameter would be reasonable, we could check with Dave and see Native Restoration Services and get an idea from him what might be appropriate.
Would an ordinance of this sort, I'm trying to just remember from what I've read, would it,
Microphone, Jerry.
I did get the feeling that it prohibited removal of a tree, of a heritage tree. But if you did take one down, you had to replace it with X.
We need to apply for a permit or go through a process with the village.
But it would also recall for some sort of replacement.
Yes.
Not necessarily in that exact
Yes,
spot.
yeah. And or, for example, let's say a parcel of land was sold and somebody proposed development on it. In fact, we went through this with Cranberry Lake Homes Development. There were trees that they wanted to take down. I mean, they did take down some. There were some oak trees taken down, but they wanted to take down more trees, and we did not allow them to do that. So this is something that would put some teeth in a negotiation for protecting trees, that there would be trade-offs, if anything. If you felt that there was something that was worthwhile enough and beneficial enough to the village, then maybe you would be willing to let a tree or two or several go, as long as they're not all being wiped out and some replacement of another factor was put in its place.
But then we would have some kind of a fine system for somebody who just went ahead and did it without.
Yes, everybody remember the headlines when Mr. T took down all the trees in the North Shore?
Well, I remember along Hainesville Road when they were talking about putting in condos on the west side of Hainesville Road, across from Highland Lake, and they cut down all those trees, and then the development never happened, and now it's just a prairie.
Yeah.
I have a question. What is that property zone?
What property?
Agriculture. The 30.
Oh, ag.
So if somebody came in and wanted to change that zoning to light industry, you basically tell him that he couldn't do it if there was some kind of ordinance to prevent him from cutting those trees or moving something.
Or you could, if you felt that whatever the proposed development was good enough, you could meet in the middle. Is there a way to work around how many trees can we save? If you're gonna take down X amount of trees, what are you gonna put back? Wally, any thoughts?
Yeah, a few.
Okay. I knew I could count on you.
Well, first of all, is, if a person owns that property now, and now we're saying we're gonna change our ordinance, and now it's gonna prohibit them from doing what they feel is on their property, I don't think that's right. I saw this happen over at Morton Grove. Somebody a guy bought a house, had a big oak tree. He tried to expand, expand his house, and all of a sudden he got into court fees that were unbelievable. He went bankrupt because this oak tree was there and they wanted to protect it. So now all of a sudden, he bought the property on the assumption that he could do what he felt like you could do, wanted to do on that property. I have no problems if somebody comes in and develop it and you work it that way. But if a person owns that property right now, it should be grandfathered in that this ordinance should not be part of that because he has the right to do what he wants to do on his land.
All right, let me ask you this, Wally. Now, you're bringing up a piece of residential property where
Yes.
there's an existing house.
Yes.
How do you feel about vacant land? Do we want to
Vacant
make
land,
some?
that's what I said. I said if it's a new purchase and it's going to be developed, it's going to be changed.
Well, whether it's new or old, there's some, a lot of those oaks I'm talking about are on vacant land.
But it's also owned by the lawn club now.
No.
Oh, I thought that was.
Well, no, there are certainly oak trees on the sports club,
Yeah.
and it would apply to them, or I would hope to apply to them. I'm happy to say the sports club values its trees. The trees are one of the best things going for it, so the last thing they're gonna do is take down a tree, unless it's dangerous or, widowmaker or something like that.
But somebody owns that, right?
There's another owner on some property,
On
yes.
that property.
Yeah, basically bought as an investment purpose or,
For
yeah.
investment purposes.
Yeah.
So if we're.
So, but like you were saying, if it has to change to a different, from ag to light industry or whatever, that's a different story. But if that person wants to go in there right now and wants to take it down, he should have the right to be able to take it down. It's his
So-
property, isn't it?
It's my property, should I put up a windmill?
Well, we did that before they did that.
Well, let me put it this way. All right, so let's say a property owner comes in on vacant land and says, just like Georgianne brought up the example of a piece, and they just clear all those oak trees that are well over 100 years old. You think let it be?
I feel it's his property, yes.
Okay, all right. All right, John, I see you nodding, so is your
Yeah,
sentiment the same?
I think it's important that we can presume that just because we're a village board, that we can tell a property owner, if I want to cut down a tree on my property, I bought the property, it's my tree, I should be able to cut it down. I don't think that we should, just because it's been there for so long, well, there were a lot of trees there that were there for so long that we all cut down to put up our houses. So I
Well, no,
don't-
actually, the board, when Cranberry Lake came in, and Ted, you're in the audience to back me on this, when Deer Point Homes wanted to build the Cranberry Lake development, we worked very hard to preserve as many trees as possible. We made them change their plan several times, because there was a lot more trees they wanted to take down.
Right, but Georgianne's neighbor who took down the tree that was on his property, that's his prerogative, it's his property.
Well, and I can agree with that on current residential. I guess I would be willing to maybe, but I'm asking about vacant land where there are groves of oaks, that you would want to see that whole grove.
I also don't think you should create a barrier to entry when we have so much commercial property right now that's not getting developed. If I'm going to try to put up a business, where am I going to go? Am I going to go to the place that's going to make it the easiest for me? Or am I going to make it somewhere that's difficult for me? I'm going to go, I'm going to go where it's easiest. And if I go to that parcel on 120 and say, wow, this would be the perfect place for my business, but I do need to clear some of these trees so that I can do what I need to do to get my business started, why are we then going to create a barrier to entry? Am I for us saying, you cut a tree down, you have to plant a tree? Yes. But I don't think you should create a barrier to entry like us saying, you cannot cut this tree down because it's been here for 100 years.
It's much the same approach that we had to deal with when we extended the bike path with wetland mitigation. If you're going to use our wetlands, you got to come up with something somewhere else. If you want to cut down this tree, you got to put something somewhere else to.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel that obviously if development comes in on any location, certainly we want good, viable development that either adds to the quality of life or brings good taxing revenue to our taxing districts. But at the same time, they're gonna have to come to us with a plan anyway of what exactly they wanna do. It seems that certainly we could negotiate on the trees. If we have nothing, there is nothing to stop them from taking them all down arbitrarily like that. And I think some of those trees would be beneficial not only to the character of our village. Boy, once you got a tree that's gone, I think it also can add to the business. Just like it added to the value of Cranberry Lake. I don't think those homes, especially with the EAVs dropping, would be worth even less if we didn't have that conservancy area or a lot of the trees that exist in that area.
So if we developed an ordinance that required permission
Yeah.
to take down a tree and possibly some swap, take this down, put this up,
Yeah.
that would give us the authority yet not really abrogate the right of landowner.
Correct.
Owner, and I would say that.
Well, when you think about it, we have, people need permits for all sorts of things. If they want to put up a fence, they have to get a permit. If they want to put a patio, they have to get a permit. And so we're not saying they absolutely can't cut the tree down, but they have to come forth with a reason why, and,
But the permitting process is more for safety than it is for, that it's to make sure that things are done safely. It's not so that we can say you can do this, you can't do that. We're not going to deny somebody a fence because we don't like the way the fence looks, although some board members tried a little while ago.
But even in our.
Well, actually, there are certain types of fence that we do prohibit, that we've prohibited for years.
But it's for safety, it's not for, it's just,
In our village plan, John,
Some of it is for aesthetics, not just safety. I mean, chicken wire is not allowed.
We
It's not a
require-
safety issue, but chicken wire is not allowed.
we require
Yeah, some people think it
businesses
is.
to install certain amount of landscape within any new building.
right, yeah,
And
no,
that
that's,
has nothing
we
to do
already
with
have that
safety.
place.
I'm sorry.
We already have that in place, it's in.
Well, that's what we just developed in the last few years, or improved.
Yeah.
If I
Jim,
don't- if-
I'm gonna ask if, I'm sorry, Wally, go ahead.
If I don't want trees on my property, you're saying that I can't do that?
go buy
You're saying
something
that I
else.
can't? Well, I'm just,
But we don't live
But
in an HOA.
but, so, I mean, that's what I look at too. Like I said, if that person owns that property at that time, we're just saying you can't do this, and you're telling him you can't do it. Or if he wants to move it over here, well, what if he doesn't want?
Well, we're not saying you flat out can't do it. We're not flat out saying they can't do
Well,
it.
that
We say,
ordinance did. I think when I was reading.
well, I think I also put a
Yeah.
note, and I think I
That's right.
prefaced at the beginning of this discussion,
Right.
okay,
That's,
that we would like them to come forth and go through a process. Jim, do you have any experience other than the couple ordinances that you got us, or any thoughts of complications of doing something like this?
Well, just a couple.
Okay.
Honest?
Doesn't sound
It
like.
doesn't sound like it.
right.
There you
Better? There
go.
we go.
Yeah, there you are.
First, we're not doing anything tonight. Let's be careful. We're not-
Calm down, everybody.
No, nobody's doing anything to anybody tonight. It won't be a vote, it won't be an ordinance, so let's start there. But just in terms of the consideration, I think just listening to the conversation tonight, certainly we can, as the board develops its concepts on what it would like this to be, we can craft the ordinance so that it provides some level of regulation without, it can happen anywhere sort of on the spectrum. It can be as strict as the ordinance that you're looking at that's an example, or it can be much less strict than that and simply be something that requires a permit before you do it, and also requires some sort of substitution planting of trees for whatever was cut down. If a tree of a certain size was cut down, then in exchange you have to plant so many trees of another size. Because you're certainly, if you cut down a an oak tree with a 25-inch diameter, you're not going to replace it with one because you can't do that. It just you can't get one and it wouldn't survive. But certainly there are ways to deal with, I think exactly what the board is discussing tonight is some level of regulation that would protect, very large, old, as this ordinance calls them, heritage trees, but then without taking away the property owner's rights to do whatever it is they want to do on their property. So we can certainly make an ordinance look like that. I think we need a little more discussion than this. Maybe that's a discussion to have in committee and then come back to the board with some concepts on what that might look like.
If I could just have one comment, what we've experienced in some other villages, if people find out you're talking about possibly doing some regulations, you may want to consider something similar to the medical cannabis moratorium, and you may want to do a moratorium on tree removal for a short period of time, because individuals may say, oh, they're going to regulate it, I'm taking my tree down now. So just thought you may want to consider that.
Just one thing I'd like to chime in, the older the trees get and the more mature these trees get, the more of a hazard they become. Just for most of the trees that have come down in the conservancy over here, of the large ones, the trunks are rotten. So it's kind of a safety issue as well. Not that I'm into going and clearing a whole field of trees that I hate to see that fail. But we need to be careful of what we're wishing for here.
The thing too, that when you mentioned Cranberry Lake, we did make them go through it. Somebody went through and checked to see which ones were good and which ones were.
Yeah, that's
Probably would
very
be a good idea to go through and do something like that over here.
Highly recommend.
And I don't mind having some ordinance on the book, right away or whatever, because the one thing about ordinances, they've been changed over the years.
Oh, yeah, you can change
So I'm
it,
pretty
yeah.
sure you put something on that, do it conservatively, and then if something happens, ordinances, we change them
They
every
can come and go.
be amended.
But I would have somebody check the groves out first.
Well, I do think we need to do some research. I think we had some good suggestions, Chuck, and that was my only intent, was let's get it out on the table. This has been brought up to me in numerous ways, and then I was not aware of how many communities do have ordinances of some type like this, and this was just a couple quick examples, just to get the discussion going. So why don't we look at, Georgianne, you got a good recommendation, you can talk to Dave Coulter. Jeff, maybe we can talk to our tree arborist or also, okay? All right, well, I think we've taken that as far as we can go tonight, so I'm gonna ask for a motion for adjournment. All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned at 8:34. Have some more cake.